So we tend to think of special needs and gifted as opposites. One needs a lot of support, and the other, they can take care of themselves, right? Even the word gifted implies special. Why would they need anything more? But what if I told you that kids who fall into the category of gifted face even more challenges than kids who don't? My son, when he was 2, taught himself to read. When he was 4, taught himself multiplication. By the time he was 6, he knew more about astronomy than I will ever know. Great, right? But at the same time, he couldn't stand to wear hats on his head, and he couldn't stand to be in loud noises, and he couldn't stand to go outside because the wind on his face was too much. I thought it was kind of funny, but didn't know what else to do about it. Didn't know what to do about it until we started having until he started having a lot of problems at school. You see, he was at a religious school, and we were told that when the kids were saying the prayers, he would put his hands over his ears. And we were told that's not okay. In fact, he started getting into trouble. He started getting into a lot of trouble. But we didn't realize that it was related. Not at that point. See, it turns out that kids who process information at high speeds also tend to process sensory information at high speeds. They'll hear things louder than most. They'll feel things on their skin more intensely. They can feel emotion super intensely, and they can feel an intense desire to jump and move about. These are the kids that need to cut the tags out of the back of their shirts or can't wear socks with seams on them. It's also related to asthma and allergies. So, you know that image we have of the nerdy kid with the inhaler? Turns out there's a reason for it. So, Kazimierz Dabrowski, he studied this population, and he found that he divided into 5 categories. So psychomotor, sensual, imaginational, intellectual, and emotional. So these kids, they're feeling things really intensely, and sometimes in order to slow down the bombardment of data coming their way, they can move slowly or try to process things more slowly and seem like they're just not getting it as much. But the opposite is actually the truth. So they can actually be diagnosed with autism. And when in reality, that's not the case at all. An interesting thing about these kids as well, we tend to think of gifted as kids being good at everything across the board, right? If you're gifted, you're strong all around. But in reality, it's not the truth. What's more likely is this profile here, where we have a spiky profile. It's also known as asynchrony. So they can be really good at certain things and really bad at others. And the problem is that most schools, they don't really know what to do with kids who, at 8 years old, are working on middle school level math, but their handwriting is barely legible. And for the kids, it can be kind of tough too, because they want to talk to their friends about what they're interested in, right? But nobody else seems to get what they're talking about. In the case of my son, at 4 years old, he was obsessed with circulatory systems. Not a lot of 4-year-olds know what circulatory systems are all about. So they can withdraw. And Dabrowski calls this his theory of positive disintegration, with the fact that we have to close off one stage of maturity in order to reach the next. And if we don't close off the first one, we can't get to the next one. So if these kids withdraw and they're not making it to the next level, they're basically being stunted at that age socially. So you've got a kid who's really brilliant, but who socially and emotionally can't really cope in the world. And worst case scenario, you get like a Ted Kaczynski. I mean, the guy was brilliant, right? But socially, he just never was able to integrate. Now imagine if he had used his powers for good and not evil. Imagine the things he could have done in the world. So another interesting thing to know about these kids is something called twice exceptionality, gifted with a learning disability. So a kid may have a learning disability that hides their giftedness, but the giftedness allows them to compensate and hide the learning disability, so that neither are they being diagnosed with a learning disability, nor are they being identified as gifted. And it can be really, really frustrating. And what this will tend to look like is defiance in a kid, or it can look like the A's and F's kid, or the one who's not working to his potential, or her potential. And it can look like a kid who is doing really well and then all of a sudden starts not doing well when the method of or delivery of the lessons are changed. So imagine you yourselves. Imagine if you're in a classroom and you're stuck doing kindergarten level work day after day after day. You would get pretty frustrated too after a while, wouldn't you? So these kids can be pretty bad troublemakers. Think about it, if they take all that power and they're putting it towards troublemaking. You've got Ferris Buellers all over the place, right? So the good news is that there are resources. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's actually a bunch more. We've been looking at special needs as one end of the curve. And really, we need to look at both ends of the curve, because both ends need extra support. And if you're out there and you see your kid or your neighbor's kid or the kid you're teaching acting up, ask yourself, are they acting up because they don't know the material, or is that they've already mastered the material and they're so bored out of their minds that they just need something to keep themselves occupied? And if you see a kid struggling with something, ask yourselves, are they struggling because they can't get the concepts, or are they struggling because they need a little more time, because something is standing in their way? Thank you.